So, Romain, welcome back. So, this was now perfect South French pronunciation of your first name, right?
Yeah, not South, but
North.
like, yeah, it's let's say it's generic French.
Oh, generic French. Yeah, I try to
yeah.
sound, accentless. So, just for you.
Yeah. So actually, I come from an area that doesn't really have an accent. So
yeah, you see, I did some research and try not to adapt to your area right now with your with your first name. So we stopped the conversation at interesting point, and there was a Bill Shannon. What I didn't knew, he created some rules for group IDs and artifacts IDs. And you were the only one who just followed the rules or tried to understand the rules. And what you did is you rewrote the dependencies for Java 6 even back then to follow the rules and have a Maven build, which actually creates clean APIs. Right? This was the summary, what you did.
Yeah, more or less. These rules are called Maven versioning rules. I think this document was even refreshed when it was donated to Eclipse. So there is a new version of that document that is somewhere, probably as a README or a markdown file or some wiki page on Eclipse.
If you can find it, send me. I will put it to show notes. If you, this would be interesting,
Yeah, sure. So since I was tasked with kind of doing combined API compile time jar for Java E7, I kind of had to go through this exercise of Mavenizing in a clean way all this process, right? And that's when I figured out that basically things were not in a good state, and these conventions that Bill wrote, basically nobody was following them. And even if people tried to follow them, like they were making mistakes because these rules were very specific and not specifically like easy to implement, right? It's like you had to basically modify like a bunch of files and maintain the OSGI metadata and all these things. So I ended up creating like a Maven plugin and redoing all the API jars that we had control over. So the API jars that we had control over were basically like most of the API jars, like, I don't know, EGB or transaction or JPA, it was like a separate team, but so we basically redid all these jars except the ones that were made by other companies, such as like CDI is done by Red Hat, so we had no control on that. But in some cases, even though the jar files were produced by other companies, I'm thinking of Batch, that was contributed by IBM, right?
And Spring.
Yeah, but the engineer that was doing the Batch API was from IBM, I think. And
I
was
think this
collaborating.
is the only API which uses impl, right? Lots of impls. All others look like Java E, but not the batch.
Yeah, that's correct. It's actually
it looks somehow alien in the Jakarta E or Java E ecosystem. So if you take a look on the APIs, how it's built, it looks differently.
Yes, I agree. And so I was collaborating with that person to also make sure that this new API was kind of following the new kind of scheme and looked, similar to the others.
What scheme was it exactly? What do you have to follow, so roughly?
Just make sure that the conventions are all, like, to me, what matters the most is the group ID and the artifact ID.
Okay.
So that if you know the package name, you can almost predict the GAV that you're supposed to use.
This is actually very important for developer experience, right?
Exactly right, because this is, in my opinion, what was a mess is like sometimes the API jar files their artifact ID was like the short version of them, like javax.rs, for instance, instead of javax.ws.rs, right? Or sometimes the group ID was not even like javax.package name, it was something else, like just javax. So at the time of Java E6, when you look at all these separate API jars, if you had a project and you didn't want to depend on the aggregated compile time API jar for Java E6, and you wanted to depend on the individual API jar files, then your POM looked like a mess, like nothing was consistent, right?
Yeah, and I never actually got the idea in the first place why there were all the individual APIs. So I knew, for the vendors it's important to have the APIs, but for me, what only mattered was the top API. What I only wanted to have in my POM is the Java 6 period, one dependency. This was the beauty of Java E for Maven projects, because I only had a single dependency and nothing else. And what I saw sometimes, other projects, they ignored the umbrella API and just included whatever they could. They had servlets and common annotations. And I say, why you are doing this? Just to look smart, or what? Is it too simple?
Yeah.
And this is what I never got. This because we would like to have modularized. It's like, what you are modularized. I mean, your server ships with everything anyway. So why you?
Yeah. In a Java environment where the app server provides all the implementation for this API, it's actually nice to have one compile time jar file dependency that you can have that reflects basically the programming model that the app server offers, right? So
and even in the Helidon case, so you only add one single microprofile dependency. It's very similar experience to back then with Java E, which I really enjoy. And Quarkus is different. So in Quarkus, I have to always think, to add all these Morai dependencies. Then I have, the microprofile dependency with everything is Morai, but not REST easy, which is not Morai. So I add everything from Morai and one REST easy client dependency, which reminds me, the modularized projects back then.
Right. Yeah. I think the difference though is that with Helidon, you have to bring the runtime with the dependency. Whereas in the case of Java E, like you don't package the runtime with your WAR file, for instance, right? So that's the biggest difference.
Yeah, of course.
In Helidon, like transitively, we have to bring all the runtimes along with the compile time APIs. So it's
you are right technically, but actually, it is still separated later because with Helidon and Quarkus, you have the application is the first jar, which refers to all the libraries, which sits somewhere else. So at the end, it's just separated again. So I would say yes, you bring all the dependencies with the API, but at the end of the day, they get separated somehow, and not the API from the implementation, rather than your business code from the infrastructural code to have the layering, right?
Yeah, that's true. But if you were to think of a use case where you are bundling third-party dependencies that your app server doesn't provide, in the old times when you were building a WAR file, you would actually put them in webinf lib directory within the jar file, right? So you have the application class path, and it's like your own dependencies that are not app server dependencies, right?
Yeah.
And then you would have the app server class path itself.
Yeah.
And these would actually translate with different class loaders, and that's. But with Helidon, when you build an app, we don't make that distinction between your own third parties and Helidon's kind of class path.
Yeah.
You end up with one lib folder that has everything in it.
One flat class loader.
Exactly.
This seems to be like a feature. Quarkus does the same. They also have one flat class loader.
Yeah. So we had some questions in Slack recently about that, and somebody was asking like, why didn't we go the route of Spring Boot and this kind of smart Uber jars?
Mm-hmm.
And the answer for that is actually very simple. It's first of all,
why Uber jars are smart? This is what I don't get.
No, because Spring Boot does some kind of crazy magic where it has a bootstrap logic that creates some kind of special class loader, and everything is kind of a little bit complicated. That's why I'm saying smart Uber jar. It's not like a jar of jars, and it's like they have some special sauce in there.
I will have to look it up. I never heard smart jar Uber jars.
No, I'm making that term up. So it's just like I'm saying smart because they have some kind of special sauce on top of this.
But if we cannot explain what the smart jar is probably the reason why we don't do it.
I think it's because their bootstrap logic is a little bit complicated because obviously doing a jar of jar is not simple, right? You have to extract probably the jars inside the jar and then create a special class loader and all this stuff.
What I only know, what we advertise at the beginning in Spring Boot, they are processing all the external dependencies to their own system jars. This is what I remember at the beginning of Spring Boot, what happened. And this is and they add everything to one huge jar. And at the beginning, they only supported specific dependencies. I don't know what the state now is. But I remember because at the beginning I got lots of questions regarding Spring Boot. Also, I never did something with Spring Boot, but I said, okay, interesting question. And this is probably what someone refers. But I would say in a microservice environment, it is a flat class loader is fine, and whatever is smart is probably not that exciting.
Yeah,
so the simpler it gets, the better it is. I would say. So
exactly. So for us, the main advantages of that approach is first, it's simple. It's regular Java class path. We're not reinventing the wheel. So
exactly.
We set the class paths in the manifest of the application jar. So we just have to have the lead folder sit next to your jar file,
Exactly.
and it's just going to work.
Yeah.
The second thing that's really good about this is that when you're using stuff like CDI or any other subsystem that requires like SPI files, right? If you do a fat jar or even an uber jar,
Yeah, you could
you
overwrite
have
the
to
stuff, right?
you have to merge these files, and you have
Yeah.
to be really smart.
Yeah.
And in the case of CDI, sometimes like there is not even a workaround, because CDI thinks of so it's going to discover beans based on the presence of the bean XML in a jar file, right? And so if you combine things that were supposed to be in separate jars into the same jar, you're going to have side effects that are not supposed to be there, right?
Yeah, and there are also
So
licensing issues as well, right? Because sometimes it's not you're not even allowed to to fiddle with the jars. But now I understand what smart jar or whatever the term was, what was meant, what is properly meant. That you deliver one super jar, uber jar, or fat jar, which contains all the other dependencies. But I mean, these times are over if you have Docker. I mean,
exactly. And so
there is
main...
no use case for that. I mean, the main reason why I really liked application servers, because accidentally they introduced Docker layering. So the war, was the uppermost layer, and I was really afraid that Helidon or Quarkus will ship, with the fat jars, because I was saying now game is over. What I can do, there is no future, because the application servers don't shared deployment is pointless nowadays, and fat jars is is only interesting for bare metal deployments. And who does bare metal? It is kind of came back in one point of time, but right now there is no bare metal. None of my clients uses bare metal, right?
Yes. So
but back to you. We are already discussing
the Docker layering. You're right.
Yeah, we are already discussing, the features of Helidon. But what I wanted to know is, you are in Prague with Java 6. You did, you follow Bill Shannon document about group ID and artifact ID, and you managed to build the first time the Java 6 API. So I have to say thank you to you that I could use Java 6 in my unit tests.
Java 7. We never
7.
came back and we never redid the Java 6 API to fix it. So we only started with a clean slate starting from E7.
But I think the Bill eliminated the tool in one point of time. So I can remember that the Java, I was able to use the Java 6 dependencies in unit tests. Do I remember correctly, or was it Java 7?
No. If you look at the Java 6 class files, the API jar file from Java 6, if you look at the class files, there is no implementation code in them.
Okay, so then it was fixed in Java 7, and I thought it was, it was Bill, but it was you.
Yeah, well, it was the team, but I was the engineer doing it.
Yeah, no, thank you for that. So I didn't knew that, because what I did with Java 6, I perform a lot of code reviews, and back then I asked the developers. I look at the POM and ask them, are you writing, unit tests? Of course, with mocks. Yeah, we test everything. So how is this possible? Because there's only one dependency, Java 6, and you cannot actually load it, So it was impossible to use Java 6 for unit tests. And back then, what we used a replacement from JBoss. They had their own clean room APIs which worked for unit tests. So this was my fallback, which I really hated, because I needed Java 6 for production and another dependency with scope test for unit testing, and this was terrible. I really hated, bloated POMs.
Yeah, and also in a sense, like an API jar file is an implementation of the API. It's not an implementation of the spec, but it's by the way the Java standard is set, each vendor should have their own version of the APIs, right? So we have this perception that an API jar file is universal, but it's actually not true. An API jar file is an implementation of the API.
Yeah. The problem were abstract classes, right? So the Java 6 had lots of abstract classes, and this where the tool removed the implementation, which broke actually the job.
Right. Yeah. And so this is also why I think JBoss historically has been shipping their own variant of the APIs.
Yeah. Okay.
I think in practice these APIs are interchangeable, but if you look at the rules, they're not supposed to be, right? They're not kind of universal. which kind of bothers me because we were always using the javax namespace, and that makes people see these things as universal, but they are not, right?
Yeah. And I had I don't know, every Java one, I walked to Bill and try, because back then there was at Sun, I think Java 6 happened at some microsystems days. And what I remember, the Java one was at the Moscone Center, and they were set up at a community day kind of tables spaces where you can join the engineers and have, technical chat about stuff. So I always, went to Bill and we had a chat about unit testing or whatever, and then we had a heating discussion about exactly this, and Bill said to me exactly that. So the API jar is actually the implementation of the API, and it contains abstract classes with some implementation, and we cannot just ship that because usually this is the job of the vendor, so you cannot take the responsibility of that. And I always told Bill, you are correct, but I'm developer and this is crazy, so you cannot. There has to be a solution for that because it's not acceptable. And Bill was thinking at math background, and he was really hard to convince. So we had really long discussions. And but as he showed me already, I laughed. Okay, you are again, right? So okay.
Yeah.
Are you aware that Bill actually passed away? So are you aware of that?
Oh yeah, definitely, yeah.
But he was a really great guy, and he achieved a lot. So I didn't knew that he actually wrote the spec for the group ID and artifact ID, and which is actually great because what really bothers me is if it is not consistent, right?
Yes. Yeah, Bill was a long time figure at Sun. He was employee number 11 or number 12 at Sun. He was a very big prominent figure in the Sun engineering team.
Okay.
He was one of the architects of Solaris. That's what he's really known for at Sun. And then later on in his career, he moved on to kind of take ownership of Java E.
Yeah.
But he was one of the developers of Unix, basically. You could put it that way at Sun.
One
he
question
worked closely
to you.
with Bill Joy also, that was, the BSD guy.
Yeah, Bill Joy was also. I don't think I met Bill Joy in person, but he was also an interesting figure. One question: do you wanted actually to work for Sun, or you didn't care at that time?
I wasn't really aware of the reputation of Sun because I mean, obviously I never used Solaris before, or I'm probably from that generation where we already had Linux and a bunch of tools. So apart from Java, I wasn't really aware of Sun. So I didn't really care.
Because what I remember, the last Java one, and there were some parties going on, and I joined the developers from Prague, actually. They were, I think, NetBeans and GlassFIsh developers. Mm-hmm. And they were really glad that they managed, to see the last Java one. So for them, there was almost religious experience. So they were absolute, fangirls and fanboys. There were also a couple of girls there. And they were really excited about Java 1. I say, we are really glad that we are able to see the last Sun Java 1. And they came from Prague. So this is what I remember. We went after the Birds of Feather somewhere. And yeah. This is what I want to ask.
Makes sense.
Yeah. They were,
when you talk to former Sun employees, they all have very good memories of Sun Microsystem.
Yeah.
So to me, it doesn't surprise me that they were behaving like that.
Okay. So and you got the enlightenment afterwards, right? So now
I got all the stories.
Yeah. Okay.
But I joined, obviously, since I made my internship right during the transition between Sun and Oracle, I joined as an Oracle employee.
Yeah, but you were surrounded by former Sun employees, I would say.
Exactly. So since I've collaborated and worked with within a group that was basically Sun Microsystem, right? Everybody thinks that I've been working at GlassFIsh for so long. Everybody thinks that I was a Sun employee, but it's funny because I actually am not. So
yeah.
I get this reputation of people see me as like, oh yeah, you are a Sun employee. But no, I never was.
Yeah, you are the Oracle native developer, right?
Exactly. Yeah.
Very good. So what you did after Java 7, after you fixed, the libraries for me so that I could just finally, perform some unit tests against the Java 7 APIs. So what happened afterwards?
Let's see. So we shipped Java 7. That was a big release for us. Mm-hmm. I think we shipped GlassFIsh 4 and Java 7 at the same time, if I'm correct. So I worked really hard on the release that year. After that, we were all kind of transitioned because after Java E7, there were times where we did not really work on Java E. If you remember, there was this quiet period of 2 years.
Yeah, and I think now I know the reason. So you said I didn't have time for Counter-Strike another year, so let's postpone the Java 8 API release. So wait for me. I'll come back. Right? Am I right? Because no one knew what happens at Oracle. So they're not released. I always had the assumption that the Java 8 developers take some vacations. And this could be one explanation. The guy who actually releases Java 8 now needs some sabbatical, to play Counter-Strike. Am I right somehow?
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah. No, but we ended up working on WebLogic for 1.5 years.
Mm-hmm.
It's a different code base, and since we were kind of it's an older code base than GlassFIsh.
Mm-hmm.
And what's interesting is GlassFIsh got rewritten between version 2 and version 3.
Mm-hmm.
And they adopted a lot of kind of very new technology that were almost like bleeding edge. Like they switched over to OSGI and adopted like a modular system, right?
Yeah, and very lean one. So like the H2K, I always HK2 or
HK2.
HK2. I always flip the characters, but it was like annotation based and really lightweight. So it was revolutionary. What I remember from Java 1, a T-shirt, a black GlassFIsh T-shirt with Java -jar glassfish.jar. You remember that?
Yes.
Yeah.
Yes.
And this Alex is walk around with the T-shirts like, why I should do this? And now it's normal, right? So you can just launch Helidon exactly the same way. 15 years later.
They also brought like concepts for like the GlassFIsh embedded stuff was also very very fresh at the time, I think.
Yeah.
So, but what strikes you as a developer is when you have something that's modularized with Maven and uses like annotation model, it's like you can just open these projects in any modern IDE, right?
Mm-hmm.
There is no special build or special class path, like everything just works.
Mm-hmm.
But if you look at GlassFIsh before that, it was basically an Ant build.
Yeah.
And with a kind of custom class loader, everywhere. So working on a project like that with a modern IDE is kind of a pain because you have to configure and set up everything. It's not going to work out of the box, right?
Mm-hmm.
And so WebLogic at the time before we worked on that was still kind of very much like GlassFIsh 2. So the developer experience was horrible because you had to run scripts to set up your class path and your IDE would not recognize any class and you could not get auto completion for anything without like spending 2 weeks on, doing some voodoo magic on your IDE just to make sure you could load the entire
Mm-hmm.
workspace. And so we basically pushed the engineering team to kind of adopt a modern build system, and they ended up using Gradle.
Okay.
Which was very interesting because for me, we were asked if I wanted to work on Mavenizing WebLogic, and I gracefully denied the request. But the interesting part about this, like on such a big project, how you tackle this problem, and you basically use a build system to kind of provide everybody the goodness of, okay, now you can load any module and so on, and all the small details. I think that was very interesting because we had basically a project that you had to almost work with VI on it, right? To be honest. Yeah. And then now you could actually use any modern IDE that understood Gradle and
so
started
after 2 years of modernization, finally you could use Emacs then, right? But no, just kidding. So you spent the time on WebLogic and you 1.5 years.
Yeah, and we implemented a bunch of features that were basically cloud related because there was a push to kind of vertical scaling and density at the time. So they wanted to kind of make WebLogic multi-tenant.
Okay.
And so the former kind of GlassFIsh team, our group worked on that WebLogic multi-tenant feature. It didn't really take off, but I think for me that was a great experience because I got to work on a big project that I didn't really have like any knowledge of, and had to navigate and make very tactical code changes in code that was working for 15 years, and suddenly you have to butcher the class and add all your stuff, right? Yeah. So that was really interesting, and as an engineer to work on such a legacy system and modernize or implementing modern features to it, right? So that I really enjoyed that part.
Was it still in Prague?
No. So I moved. I stayed in Prague 4 years, and I moved to the US in 2015.
Okay.
So
but Prague is a really nice city, right? You enjoyed your stay in
it
Prague?
is. Yes. I would recommend Prague to anybody.
Yeah, I really like Prague. So I was several times in Prague and I always really enjoyed it. So, the old town is really, really nice.
Yeah, and the Czech people are very, very nice too. So I would
Yeah.
recommend anybody to do the same thing as I did. Apply for a position in Oracle, at Oracle in Prague.
Yeah, exactly. Go to Prague first, don't even try to go to US, right? So and then okay.
Yes.
And how was you okay? So you moved from Prague to US. How was your experience with the US? So you regret, to leaving Prague and going to Bay Area, or what was your experience?
So the main problem for me in Prague is I did not speak Czech, and at some point, if you want to kind of spend more than a couple of years, it's better if you want to stay there, for a long time to learn the local language, right? And I tried, but I did not really succeed because I had to speak English every day, and I was probably focused on that.
Mm-hmm.
So I wanted first to move to the US, basically to really just not have the language barrier. Because the problem you have when you are in a foreign country and you have to speak English to interact with others, and English is not their main language, is whenever you are in a discussion, people have to change the language they use just so that you can understand.
Mm-hmm.
If you want to be included in the discussions in a room, they have to speak English just so that you could chime in. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
Even if you're not there, if they're speaking in Czech among themselves and you're sitting there, you will never understand and you could never participate.
Yeah.
So it takes an effort from both sides. And at the end of the day, the people were really nice, but it at some point I got kind of depressed that I had to force the entire room to speak English just because I was there.
But could you understand something in Czech or no way?
Yes, obviously I was able to navigate around and I could do my daily life. But Czech is a language that is spoken quite fast when spoken fluently, and it's very, very different from French. Mm-hmm. So I think it's probably closer to German in the way it functions, where there's no articles or pronouns, but the words are shaped at the end, so it changes based on the context, right?
Okay.
And that makes it for me harder to kind of recognize things when put in a sentence.
So what you saying that
word
French is more similar to English than to Czech?
In that sense, because when you say a word in French, that word doesn't really change whether it's singular or
then it's similar. Then it's Czech similar to German, yes.
Yes, in that sense, yes. There is declinations. And I found that it makes the language a little bit harder to grasp when you hear people talking.
Okay. What I learned in Czech, because for unknown reasons, I was invited once to Oracle conference in Prague for a keynote, I think even. And I was at the airport in Prague, and there was a huge mascot. And this was a Mauer. No, how it's called? Yeah, and it was called in Czech Krytek.
Oh, Krytek, yes, it's a mole.
A mole, exactly, Mauer, mole.
Yes.
And I said, okay. Then I learned, this Krytek and drilling. I forgot drilling. So, but I look it up, and the entire keynote I was about Krytek and drilling, but I mess up some wording, and it was lots of fun. So people still remember the keynote where I try, to explain how Krytek works with microservices. So this was lots of fun, and yeah, this is what I remember.
Good choice. If you want to get Czech people interested, that's a very good choice, because Krytek is a cartoon character from the 50s, and it's really popular over there.
But there's a huge Krytek at the airport. You saw them? There's an entire shop of the Kryteks, so you cannot miss it.
Yeah. Actually, I used to buy them as Christmas gifts to bring back for my family. So
okay, Krytek, and then I learned in Prague there is also the mouse. It's called Miska or something, and then they are just couples or something like this. And I explained the story at the keynote, and it was lots of fun. Okay, yes, now you are back to. So, what is your impression of? You're probably in the near of San Francisco. What is your impression of moving from Prague to US? So you like that?
Oh, it's very I like that. The life here is very different. So first of all, it's like the weather. Yeah, so the weather is basically the main advantage that you could think of. There's never any clouds, and the sky is always blue, and the temperature is warm most of the year. There's basically 2 seasons. There is summer and then there is spring.
But this is exactly like my desktop. It's no different. So if I look, on my desk background, I see a mountain with blue sky. So it is exactly the same climate as my room.
Exactly. Well, I mean, this picture, you probably have a Mac, right? So Cupertino is very close to where I live, so it's exactly like that. Yeah. But that's. I mean, I wear shorts like maybe 10 months out of 12.
Okay.
And so that to me is the best benefit of living in the Bay Area.
Mm-hmm.
There is a lot of downsides, like there's a lot of people here, so depending on where you live, you will have a lot of traffic.
Mm-hmm.
And so that's kind of sad. Also, housing is insanely expensive.
Still, I think it's getting cheaper, right? No?
Oh, no.
Okay.
If you want to buy a house, even a small one, you have to count in millions.
Okay.
So, and for a person to kind of try to establish life over there and build a family and buy real estate, you have to get a lot of money.
Okay.
So
even outside of the cities.
Oh, yeah.
Okay.
You'd have to get like up to, I don't know, a 3-hour commute to get something really cheap.
Okay.
Yeah.
Okay.
You have to go really far south to get something cheaper than.
Okay.
Yeah. So and the Silicon Valley today is much bigger than it was, right? So you could think of almost like Redwood Shore, which is like very close to the airport, all the way down to like South San Jose.
So Redwood Shores is where Oracle is, right?
Yes. Yes. San Mateo, Redwood Shores.
And you're working in the Redwood Shores right now?
No. I work in the former HQ of Sun Microsystem. It's in Santa Clara.
Oh, nice. But I thought this was Facebook.
Oh, no, you're thinking of the previous Sun headquarters in, what's the name of it? Yeah, so that headquarters was built in the early 2000s, I think 2004 or something, and then they moved their headquarters over there. And what Facebook bought is the previous campus before that.
Okay.
With the famous picture of like the logo of Sun, that
exactly.
they turned around, and yeah, I know that.
Exactly.
We still have a couple of relics here. Like there's a fountain with like a old Sun logo on it.
Oh, nice.
Yeah, but the campus is really nice. I don't get to enjoy it these days because of the COVID, but the campus is really nice.
Okay. Regarding shorts, and my first Java 1 is the year 2000. So and I say, okay, this is California, is warm. And this was in San Francisco, of course. And it was never that cold. It was in, I think, what was the first? In April. Around April was the first Java ones, I think always in spring. And it was crazy cold. So what I bought jacket, everything I bought, in San Francisco because way too cold. It was colder than in Germany, actually. But San Francisco is unique, If you go outside San Francisco, it's warmer. But what I couldn't believe, everyone said me, that's okay, you are stupid, They're like 10 kilometers difference is nothing. So I would say there's a huge difference, right?
There is a huge difference. Yeah. Like there is a microclimate around San Francisco.
Which is unbelievable. If you go across the bridge,
you have to be careful when you get inside the hotels because you could always catch a cold.
Yeah,
because it's actually going to be like colder sometimes inside and outside, and because of this microclimate, and sometimes you have to get outside and you have to put your jackets on and so on. Like you don't realize that when you go inside the hotels, especially when you go to Java 1, right? Yeah. That's how people were catching colds back then because the way they manage temperatures inside the hotels and the fact that the weather is so weird outside, then you end up basically just catching a cold.
Yeah.
I remember the first time we went to Java 1 with the prac team, like half of the people that came with us just got a cold.
Yeah.
So, and so you're very right. Like whenever I go to San Francisco, I'm just taking a jacket or something in case it rains because the weather is not as predictable.
This is the time where you have, you cannot use the shorts, right?
Yeah. Even though right now, like the weather is pretty nice for that time of the year. So
nice. So what happened after your WebLogic fix? So you improved the situation a bit and then get bored with WebLogic, or what happened then?
So we were working on that for probably a year and a half, and at that time there were a lot of political moves at Oracle, so we got shifted around quite a bit. And I think what happened after that is there was a push for open sourcing or putting GlassFIsh and Java-E on GitHub. Basically, that's the next step. And so the problem that we had was that Java.net, the former Kenai-based platform, was being shut down. And Java.net was entirely run by Oracle inside, in-house, right? So they basically, were going to pull the plug, and we had to kind of migrate and figure out how we were going to migrate all our stuff onto GitHub.
Which is still a pity. So what I never understood, the Java.net, there was nice name, and this was nice community actually. So I don't think it was necessary to shut it entirely down, right? Just my personal opinion. I mean, because it was a brand, it looked nice.
Yeah, I think the problem is it didn't really age well, and the operating cost was probably not worth it for the executive at Oracle.
Okay.
That's the only reason I can think of.
Okay.
And if you compare that to GitHub is basically like more, open. It's not like Java. It's everything.
I don't mean, the repositories. I meant Java.net had, the news part and community part, just that. So,
I see.
So this is what I meant. Not. Of course, I would never, run my own SCM, but they could leave, just the community part, like the portal to Java News or whatever, and then of course.
Yeah, I don't know what happened to that.
Yeah, this was transitioned to Oracle Developer or something. So the Oracle Code or Oracle Developer program, which I ask myself, because Java has a brand, so this is like I would say Java as a name is a stronger brand than Oracle Developer Program or something like this. But yes, this is what was a pity. Also that they renamed Java 1 to Code 1. Now it doesn't matter, but I say, okay, Java 1 was unique and the Code 1 is just generic name. And if I were Oracle, I would introduce, Code 1's, JavaScript 1, whatever they have, R1 and whatever. And everything could be under the umbrella of the Code 1 or something like this, but it's too late. But this is what I didn't got, because they already bought Java, so I would just use the brand a little bit more.
Yeah, I cannot agree more.
Yeah. Okay, so you lost Kenai. Kenai was also nice. Nice name, nice logo, and they use Mercurial, to do the stuff. Also understandable that, GitHub or whatever is, of course, you have to use it. But Kenai was actually also nice idea, but it was not well maintained, I would say, at Sun Microsystems.
Yeah, it did not age very well,
I
think.
Yeah.
And especially after the acquisition, I don't think there were many people behind the project. So that's probably the reason for that.
Yeah.
So we had to work our way basically in transitioning the GlassFIsh subprojects and GlassFIsh itself, along with all the Java stuff, onto GitHub, right? So not just the source code management, but everything in terms of like, okay, we're using Jira, and we have to transition out of Jira into something else. So how are we going to migrate all this content that we have in the issues, or even the websites, right? There was a lot on Kenai. You had you could choose between Git, Subversion, or Mercurial. So you had the source code management. You had Jira, and then you had also like a web dev endpoint you could use to kind of upload files and access these things through HTTP. So in other words, projects were basically having their downloads hosted by Kenai. Right. And so we had to figure out an equivalent solutions for all these things. And that was quite a lot of work. So during that period, obviously, since I'm very knowledgeable in this space, I was providing a lot of insights for our management to make decisions, because they had to basically make a proposal to the executives at Oracle and come up with a plan. Here's what we're going to do. And obviously, like today you could think of GitHub is the one and only choice for being an open source project, right? But even this kind of question was debatable at the time, and which kind of made me mad. But they were kind of thinking, should we choose between like Bitbucket or GitHub? And I mean, for me, the question was just not even something that you should ask. Is if you want to be visible as an open source project today, you have to be on GitHub.
Yeah. But what I'm really asking myself today about GitHub is, will be something else, or is GitHub the golden standard because it belongs to Microsoft? And the question is, if a manager at Microsoft decides the same, that GitHub becomes a little bit too expensive, and they will try to introduce something which community doesn't like, what can happen is in shortest amount of time, GitHub might not become the next big things, but people can move around to something else like Bitbucket, probably not, but GitHub.next, right? So this could actually happen.
Yeah, but I would say we're probably at the point where it's too big to fail, almost.
Okay.
Right.
Yeah, this can be. Yeah.
Also, with Git, the beauty of Git is you can migrate in.
Yeah, you're right.
A very short amount of time.
But GitHub, I wonder myself, it can really happen that if Microsoft, but I see the opposite what happens right now, which is interesting because I was the GitHub, I paid the GitHub Pro license, and now it's no more necessary. I get the same feature for free. So it's actually the opposite happens, but it could really happen that because of Microsoft is behind GitHub, so one manager says, okay, now you restrict the amount of pulls or whatever what Docker did with the registry, and this could make some people angry, and this could lead to another solution. But you are right, this could happen now. Back then, GitHub was the thing. I would say. Then now I think it's more questionable than back then, right? Because now you have Bitbucket, which is viable. You have GitLab. Back then there was only GitHub, and doing something with Mercurial wouldn't fly, I would say.
Yes, I agree. There are viable alternatives now. So if Microsoft were ever to kind of mess this up, then we would be able to migrate. And I'm sure the community would set up like migration scripts or tools all around the place, so you wouldn't even have to bother to write your own migration tools.
Yeah, exactly.
And talking about migration tools, this is basically what we had to do. We had to transition like Jira into GitHub issue trackers. Or for me, the most interesting part was, and that was very important to me, it's our source code management had a ton of history that I think is very valuable for people, because what's nice about GitHub is GitHub can reflect all your contribution you've ever made on GitHub projects. And it doesn't matter that the contribution you've made were made at the time where the project was on GitHub. It just gets the data out of the commits. So if you're uploading a new Git repository that's like 15 years old, you're going to get credits for the commits you've made 15 years ago, right? And so for me, what was really, really important is that I was converting the repositories and maintaining all this nice history so that people could have credits on GitHub for the work that they did on GlassFIsh at the time.
Yeah, you're saying that nicely, but actually what you wanted to see, your contribution to Java 7 APIs, right?
Yeah, my selfish.
Selfish, as I guess.
Evil self. Yeah.
So there's there's the only commits which are bold or specific font. Like
the star next to it.
Star, exactly.
Yes. But
it is also interesting piece of history, because sometimes you can remember if you are really open source hacking and say what I did Christmas 5 years ago, and you see, oh, there was this my contribution. This is a nice feeling actually.
Right. And so so what I did is I figured out like what's the best migration tool for SVN to Git, and the answer was not so simple, because you have SVN to Git Git SVN rather.
Exactly.
And Git SVN doesn't work very well. It's rather straightforward, and it doesn't really produce a nice history when you have a bunch of merge and when you have a complex layout within the repository. So also in GlassFIsh, they migrated out of CVS to SVN the first time. So there was like basically imported history into SVN, and then there was history that was made on SVN itself. And the way they did that, basically, there was like a clear transition, and then the Git SVN, the tool itself, would bug, and it would not be able to kind of convert that part of the history. So in other words, the history would stop at GlassFIsh 3. When they migrated out onto SVN, but all the history before that for GlassFIsh 2 that was based on CVS would be missed, right? So and the fact that the GlassFIsh Subversion repository was split and there was multiple projects hosted on it. For instance, at the top, we had like a API directory where we had multiple API projects for EGB, for transactions, and so on. And so I wanted to be able to create small Git repositories for each of these smaller directories and only have the history that relates to these directories, right? So I ended up finding a tool that was written by the KDE team, the Linux desktop.
Wow.
And they wrote a tool because they also migrated themselves out of, like, let's say, a mono repo in Subversion into multiple repos in Git. And so they wrote this tool in C++, which is, like, to my knowledge, this is the best tool available. It's called SVN to Git.
Okay.
And so I basically, and the problem is like this tool can get a little bit complicated when you use it. So you have to really get familiar with it. You have to work on a bunch of regular expression, and you have to know your history so that you can exclude certain commits and certain things.
You are
But
fluid
what
with regular expressions?
More or less, yes.
Okay, because I always forget them. So it's just really, I don't know, I learned them, I think, 5 times, and I've done do nothing with them. I always forget them. And the last time I was pretty good, but now nothing. I would say it is like one of the technologies which is really hard to learn for me. It's like, it's crazy.
Yeah. Well, you just need like 40 minutes in Google and you can figure it out.
Yeah,
So.
again, but I always forget it. So usually, I remember what I did, but it's like regex is like, after 2 weeks, I completely forget what.
Yeah, for me, it's the complex use case when you have to like the negative look ahead and all these things. Like I don't remember these, but doing like simple like grouping and pattern matching, that's straightforward.
Yeah. Okay.
Okay. So what I did is I basically I set up all the GlassFIsh repositories that were based on this version, and I basically made the infrastructure that we needed to kind of create really nice Git repositories that preserve the history for all the people. And then I went into some kind of archaeological journey where I tried to map every username to an email.
Okay.
Because in Subversion, your username is not your email. And sometimes your username was just made of a bunch of numbers and we don't know who that person was. So I asked around all the employees that were still there and tried to find, do you know who that person is, right? And so I made like a directory, basically a mapping of user
right?
IDs to email addresses, so that people could actually register these email addresses on their GitHub account and have basically their commits linked to their account. So I think we did a really good job. If you go on the GlassFIsh repository and all the repositories that are in the Java organization, you will see basically most of the history being preserved.
So what I will try after the show is try to very first GlassFIsh commit. Let's see who performed the very first initial GlassFIsh commit. Would be interesting.
I don't think the history goes up to the very first GlassFIsh commit. I think what you might be able to see.
Oh.
Because at that time it was imported from scratch into CVS. So you're going to see like probably an automated drop-in from CVS.
But it will be probably GlassFIsh 2, right?
Yes. Oh, no, it's even before that. It's Sun, Java, App Server, SJS 1.
Okay.
Before even GlassFIsh.
Yeah, but okay.
Before it was open source, so
yeah,
it's from the very first app server, like I think the Java 4 SDK or something like this.
Yeah, that's the first one I had to use at the Sun Microsystems courses. It was a commercial version, and this was like, and then was like educational version, the Java J2E deployment kit or something like this, where it was deployment tool and the server. And there was a commercial, and then they open source everything and made the GlassFIsh 1. But regardless, it will be interesting to see how far it goes back, right?
Yes. And so I'm kind of really happy about this because I was able to kind of...
And even you are the only guy who worked on the transition with the scripts and the regular expression?
So no. So I made all the groundwork, and then once I basically explained to everybody how what tool we were going to use, then we scaled up the work because there was a lot of repositories that we had to take care of. And then so I did GlassFIsh and most of the GlassFIsh sub projects, but then we scaled out to all the, because there were many repositories, to all the other repositories with other engineers from, I think they were from India, working at Oracle India.
Okay, but you were the one for GlassFIsh.
Yeah.
Nice.
I was the main consultant behind this project, you could say.
Yeah, cool.
Nice. I did not take care of the migration of the issues, though. That's I didn't do that. So
yeah, but in GlassFIsh there were not a lot of issues. It was a flawless server, basically.
It's a bug-free code. Yeah,
the two issues you could migrate just by copying the 2 lines of things manually. Okay, nice. But
the sad part about the migration to E4J is that I don't know if it's because of Oracle or if it's because of Eclipse, but we had to do a drop-in without history on all the new repositories.
Oh.
So there is a discontinuation of the Git history between Java is GlassFIsh and Jakarta is GlassFIsh.
That's sad.
That is, to me, given all the efforts that I spent, doing that, it's a little bit sad, yes.
And it's a piece of internet history, basically. So I mean,
well, and also for the engineers, sometimes like if you look at a piece of code, you don't know why a certain, like you cannot blame a file that is like 10 years old.
Yeah.
I think that's a problem. But
yeah,
we're not going to remove all the repositories, they're archived, so they could still go on the other repository and blame the file over there, right?
yeah, exactly. Okay, so after everything was migrated, what you did then?
After that, we worked on a project that was called Java for Cloud, which is the ancestor of Helidon.
Okay. And how you got to the project? I mean, this was like natural to go through migration to GitHub to switch to Java to cloud, or?
It's basically the push to microservices and I think the pressure created by Spring Boot.
Okay.
So our management, I'm not sure. I mean, this is my personal opinion, but I think our personal management was trying to come up with an answer to Spring Boot internally, and so that's how it was created. There were multiple attempts on things that were based on Jersey and different experiments, but we ended up having a POC from another project, and then it became named Java for Cloud internally as a code name. And we released that as Helidon because we cannot use Java in the name because it's a registered trademark. So then we started working on Helidon and basically open sourcing what was back then Java for Cloud.
What's interesting is there are still, projects, GlassFIsh no more, most Payara, so GlassFIsh to Payara, which GlassFIsh project would migrate to Payara or to Whitefly, which are perfectly happy with everything actually. So with memory consumption, with startup time, with whatever, which are reasonable projects. So I would say what would also work back then is, to make GlassFIsh even more popular. But this was not the strategy. This one I ever got because you could just demodularize GlassFIsh a little bit. This is what I would do, just to skip a little bit of the OSGI because no more needed and get rid of the shared deployments. And then you could also get, a cloud-ready runtime, right?
I cannot agree more. But from the perspective of our management, that probably wasn't an option. So
yeah, and I was asked actually from Oracle, so there was a management call, and I just joined for free. They just asked about my opinion about what's next, and I say they always mentioned WebLogic, and I say yeah, but we have GlassFIsh. WebLogic is probably too big, but if you just tune GlassFIsh, I mean this is hyper competitive, and you have already in place all nice APIs, and we had to wait 10 years, and we got something again. So I would say Helidon or Quarkus are very similar to it. If you look at Quarkus right now, it is just reversed Whitefly. It's not like they implemented everything from scratch. They use their own proven technologies and have Quarkus and Helidon at the same time. You also not implementing probably everything from scratch, but you can also use already existing stuff. And this is why
you could say that we rewrote something that already existed. It's just in a different fashion, basically.
Yeah,
it's more or less the same.
And this is why and what's funny now, because so I had never opportunity to to use Spring Boot from scratch. Where I tried to have some firefighting in project which Spring Boot was involved, but innocent. So the developers were the problem, not Spring Boot. But I helped in some Spring Boot projects, but they were okay. But what I heard a lot, I spent a lot of time with GlassFIsh, as you probably know, and Payara, Whitefly, Jakarta E, and Java Space. And I always heard, Spring and Spring Boot is lightweight. And nowadays, so this year and last year, I heard people are moving, or I hear it doesn't have to be as small as Helidon or Quarkus, which means that Spring Boot became the next problem probably. So what I hear a lot, that it is actually, it consumes a lot of memory and it boots slowly, which is, I don't know how it's possible because it was always claimed to be a lightweight. What I think what happened is that the developer just add dependencies, too many dependencies, and then becomes slow. But what's funny observation I have is that the arguments just changed. So at the beginning, Spring Boot was meant to be the lightweight alternative, and now it becomes the monolith,
the
almost.
enterprise ship.
Yeah, this is what is crazy to me. It's exactly like if I remember my early Java days, I always was told Java is slow. We have to use C or C++ because Java is a toy language, and so I hear it a lot. And then the discussion switched. So like Java is so fast, we don't need the speed. Therefore, you can use Scala to have better developer experience, or Groovy or whatever it was that day, because it is slower. Yeah, it is slower, but no one cares about the performance. So and now we have the same argumentation. Now they say, okay, Spring Boot consumes memory and it starts slower, but no one cares because no one needs, the memory consumption. In my project, I heard, 5 years, we have to be, startups is important, memory is important, and now nothing is important anymore, or is important. It's like, strange argumentation.
Yeah. I do think that the startup time doesn't matter as much, and it's only a matter of perception by the people when they create a new project and I think that's the problem that Java had. Like you were writing a small Java program and then you started it, and obviously when the JVM starts, it's slow. It's not where the JVM shines, right? We know the JVM is fast after a couple of minutes when it's warmed up. And if you compare that with a C program, and obviously like the difference is clear, right? And so to some degree, I think the hype of GraalVM is also somehow related, because you get the same feeling when you have a GraalVM native image program. You start it, it's blazing fast, right? And so I don't think it's that much of a problem if an application, like a web application, is a little bit slow to start, as long as it performs well once it's warmed up, right?
Yeah, performs well. No one cares because no one measures this really. So I spend lots of time with larger projects, and they writing unit tests like crazy, but stress tests or load tests, no one has time for that because they spend all
as
the
long
time.
as it's not visibly slow, no one cares, right? Yes.
And WebLogic, back to WebLogic, it was almost the same experience. So I was a huge WebLogic fan actually, and I used WebLogic a lot until version 8, what I remember. And at WebLogic 8 was blazing fast. So I forgot the numbers, but it's booted and started in a few seconds. And it came actually with WebLogic.jar, was like 30 megs, was everything there. And I also remember there was like WebLogic client jar. But the point was, it was very fast. And then they added more and more enterprise features, and then it becomes really slow. So I just lost interest in WebLogic then. But until 8, just what I remember was a great experience. And I had back then it was very similar situation to now. So everyone said, okay, enterprise Java, but WebLogic was blazing fast, was lightweight, easy to install, everything was nice. And GlassFIsh was the same. And even, you said GlassFIsh v2 and GlassFIsh v3. GlassFIsh v3 introduced the modularization, which I say, why you are doing this? Because it costs a lot of time. And actually, I always run my entire GlassFIsh. I don't even see the point, just to start half of the modules. I mean, who cares about that? So I always use my the entire GlassFIsh. And what I remember is also, some of my clients wanted to deactivate the EGB containers, and in GlassFIsh, you could actually see the bundle size, and it was like 700 kilobytes. So it's not like a huge bundle. It was a tiny. And therefore, it's not this interesting how the industry moves, back and forth between modularization and demodularization.
Well, I think it had some impact on the memory footprint, because in GlassFIsh, they were only class loading the modules that were wired at runtime.
Yeah.
So
they had
HK2 has this kind of integration where they were starting the bundles lazily.
Yeah.
So unless you're using a feature, a bundle is from that bundle is not going to be started, and therefore is not going to be loaded in the class loaders.
Yeah, but usually I needed my project lots of features, and what really annoyed me in GlassFIsh v3, what I remember, is I think even I opened an issue, because in GlassFIsh v2 the admin console started immediately. And v3, I had to wait until the bundle activates. So this was annoying for me, because at the beginning, I always wanted to have the admin console, because this is what I work with, right?
Yeah, and the admin console is deployed also lazily. So you had to basically wait twice. You had to wait for the auto deploy.
Sniffer, right? In GlassFIsh, there were sniffers who try to find what they are using and then loaded lazily the bundles. Exactly.
Right. Yeah, that's from the deployment code. Yeah.
Okay. So you worked on Java for Cloud. Was it fun?
Yeah. So the origins of Java for Cloud, it's because Java, I forgot which version, but version 7 or 8 introduced lambdas, and now there was this whole kind of hype train around functional programming in Java, and also at the same time, reactive was a big kind of keyword. It was only, like we were hearing about actors and all the stuff that they were doing in Scala, and then people were doing that in Java, and then that's basically where the hype was. So the true roots of Helidon were, let's make a Java web framework that is basically embracing the functional programming language and something more or less based on expressjs. I'm not sure if you know that JavaScript framework, where you express your routes and then you just implement your endpoints almost like in line with lambdas, and also kind of where everything is asynchronous. So that's basically the roots of Java for Cloud. It was, let's implement another web framework that is functional first and reactive first, and let's see where that goes, right? So that experiment took off, and then eventually became what's now the Helidon web server.
Or SE, right?
For SE, exactly. So that's where the project started. And then when we were building things around that, like we added config and a bunch of other features, but at first the experiment started with web server. Web server and config were the first two modules, I think. And then like security
popular, and I think I saw it the first time in Java 1, and I think it was even before public release. So Dimitri told me that back then, I think it was like, preview or something like this.
Yeah, I think it's controversial because reactive streams itself is controversial among Java people.
Yeah.
Because the programming model is changing things, and you cannot debug much, and everything is obscure.
Yeah.
It's like the whole async discussion can be very heated internally, if you know what I mean.
Yeah.
So I think it had some success with a certain crowd, and it didn't really ring a bell with the other crowd. I think the more traditional Java-E crowd does not really like this stuff because it's plain Java and it doesn't have any annotations, and it means you're writing your own boilerplate, right?
Yeah. And I ask you always why I should do this, right? Because if I can write less code with a few annotations and this is good enough, then I'm completely not interested in any reactive stuff. So this is my personal opinion, right?
And then right, I mean, I respect that opinion, but the other side of the house is the people that don't want to know what's happening inside these obscure containers and annotations and want to be able to debug things all the way down just from their IDs. And so an API such as the web server, gives you that capability, right? So it's simple, it's something you can understand, and it's very similar to other frameworks that people might be familiar with. And so that's because we had this kind of conflicts internally among, people's views on what we should do. Then eventually when we started supporting microprofile and we, wanted to brand Helidon, we were struggling. What is the programming model of Helidon and so on? And that's where we came to the conclusion that we want to support both models.
Yeah.
Because there are people that are like more like Java-y style. They want their annotations. They want CDI. They want to program using this powerful annotation-based programming model, right? And then there is the other house, which is like, no, I need to control and I need to have the sense or the perception that I can understand what's going on, right? I want to be able to debug and put a breakpoint all the way down. And so that's when we basically decided to go with the SE and MP branding. So microprofile was added like later on. Right before we open sourced Helidon, it basically was the big thing that we did when we did Helidon. We said, okay, it's J4C, but we need to add microprofile, and then it's going to be Helidon SC and MP.
Yeah, and this was, I think, a very good move because at least for me, it would be not even mildly. I wouldn't be not interested at all, just to learning another reactive Java SE API. But with microprofile, it makes sense because I can still, debugging. The question is, I used Jakarta and Java for a long time. And only in very few cases, I had actually to debug the entire application server. Usually it's very obvious what happened. So it is simple enough. And the reactive stuff still pays off if you do reactive messaging or you're dealing with Kafka. This is where reactive programming shines because it's natural.
Right.
But yes. Using reactive for everything, I just don't get it. So for me, it is like buying a race car and go to shopping. I mean, to a shopping mall. For me, it doesn't make any sense. Yeah, I mean, it's okay, we can do this, but why? And I always ask the question why. I never got an answer because it's funky or whatever. And so what means I'm in general absolutely not interested in learning proprietary APIs because they come and go, But microprofile will remain because there are multiple implementations. This is the appealing part,
Right. Even though in practice, I'm pretty sure you tie yourselves up to your vendor without really realizing it, right? So some small details here and there that, like, as the project's growing, is going to make the migration to a different vendor challenging, right?
Well, yeah, but what we did, for instance, we migrated from all the Java E servers to microprofile, and we spent a surprising short time to do this. So my clients were actually delighted that it worked that well. And this only worked because we had the APIs.
They were probably very diligent in not using too many vendor-specific features.
If you know me, we always just use the API. So everything else, I call it thin wars. And this, I would say it always paid off in larger projects, because if you are relying on vendor-specific features and third-party APIs, you will have to maintain them, which costs times, when the result is no one maintains them, and they tend then to be outdated and cause problems. So this is the other side of the open source coin, I would say.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and to back you off on that, the fact that we support microprofile is also a strategic move for us, because it means we can be more or less like the next generation offering for Oracle customers that want to transition out of the traditional WebLogic licenses, right? So not even that, is like any Java E vendor, we can offer an alternative, a supported alternative, right? A commercially supported alternative to them on basically the same APIs. Like if they were a Java E web profile, project based, then they can probably migrate over to microprofile without much changes to it.
Yeah, and so what I'm saying, so with the Java SE Helidon, I don't think any of my clients would be interested in Helidon at all. Not even proof of concept. And with microprofile changes the game, I would say.
Yeah, and if you just look at Helidon SE, then you would have we would be competing with Vertex, and Vertex itself has its own community. So you could actually question, like, if Helidon was just SE, then why not choose Vertex over Helidon SE, right?
And Vertex the same. So I had already a discussion with the guy behind Vertex. I forgot his name. Clément, right? Clément Escoffier.
Clément, yes.
What's his last name pronounced? In the neutral French way. What was it? Clément.
Escoffier, I think.
Escoffier, exactly. So
Escoffier. Yeah.
Escoffier. So I don't try to have the neutral accent, not too much south or north from French. And we also had the chat, and I say, okay, at the end of the day, Vertex is like a more specialist tool, right? So and there are cases where reactive shines, but you don't have to use reactive all over the place. This is what I understand. But just using reactive because it's funky, this is what I don't understand at all. The whole fashion-driven development is really some kind of boring because it changes every 2 years,
Right. And if you think about it, in Helidon, it is almost an implementation detail.
Yeah.
So if you want to go reactive, you can, but then you're not on your own, but you're using these reactive libraries, and you're going to be in some kind of rat hole, whether you like it or not.
Yeah.
But with Helidon, we have a bunch of kind of APIs around that. So when let's say you're writing a web server endpoint and you want to consume the payload from a post request, as, I don't know, a JSON object or whatever, right? You don't even have in your code to see anything that's, say, reactive. It's like we have a wrapper API around these things. And in fact, it's actually a good news, because we are thinking really hard about the transition over to Loom.
Exactly.
And the obsolescence of reactive with the arrival of Loom is, it's written on the wall, right?
Yeah.
So we also have heated discussion internally within the team whether or not what we're going to do with reactive.
Yeah, I would say.
And we're going to support reactive, but it's not going to have. such a prominent place as it used to have. I think
Exactly.
that's what's
So I would say
end up being
just to use reactive to scale better is pointless because you have Loom. And I would just use reactive where you have reactive use cases, where you have, a source of events with changes and you can just subscribe to these events and do something with it. This is beautiful. But, having HTTP server, which is reactive, I don't get it. Having a Kafka, GMS, WebSockets, server-side events, which are reactive, a source of events where I can subscribe to, this is very natural and really nice programming model.
Yeah, well, the use cases for Helidon SC are very specific. Is if you want something small and really fast in terms of requests per seconds, you should use SC over MP because we have much better numbers in terms of performance.
Yeah, what means much better?
I think it's a factor of 2 almost in some cases.
Yeah, but
there is a benchmark. If you know the Tech Empower benchmark, you can look at the numbers there, and we have numbers for both flavors.
The question is just, is it fast enough? And I believe it is going to be fast enough for most of the projects.
Yeah, Helidon MP is basically on par with other microprofiles implementation, so it is fast enough. Yeah.
Yeah. So if I will be if I will build Netflix or API gateway or whatever, I would probably use SE or even less. So then I will probably create my own highly tuned stack. But my project, if you hit your database in the backend, your web server doesn't matter. Yeah, this is the problem. The secret sauce of our project. So I get often questioned about scalability, and there's the set truth is that most of the project use one database, and they hope that if they start hundreds of microservices and everyone meets in the database, they solve the problem. But it gets worse because you get more contention in the database and you have logs in the database. So this is actually what usually happens, right?
Yeah, unless you implement something crazy like CQRS, you're not going to be able to have much throughput.
And if CQRS, what it means is that you have 2 channels to the backend, and probably you will need 2 data sources which you replicate somehow. So you will lose properly consistency, and you will end up implementing some Zagas and twice as much use cases. And at the end of the day, you will ship, a nice small monolith. You don't have such problems, right? From the beginning with. So but complete different story. Why I actually, after 3 hours of discussion, so what I wanted to talk with you actually is about Uber is a German, about a nice project is the CLI. Yeah. So what I was delighted to find that the Helidon comes with a command line interface. And first, what I saw is it looks like Go library, and I said, okay, strange. These are Java projects, and they ship, a native library. And I asked Dimitri, and I say, yeah, it is actually written in Java. It's like, why not? You also don't post, a jar, because it will be more obvious. And this is actually cross-compiled from. This is the result of probably GraalVM, right? So this is native library. So it's called Helidon. And you can launch it and say Helidon init, and it comes with configuration, which pulls from my user folder, so I can pre-initialize, the output. And I actually wanted to create a pull request because what I wanted to have is that it also remembers my choices regarding MP or SE. I always prefer MP, for instance, and also I think to store some more choices. So what I would like to do is Helidon init and pull 80% from my config. This would be nice. And
I see.
Because he asked me now, I think 2 or 3 questions are just too much, and I created lots of POCs. But
so which archetypes are you using? You're using the MP Quick Start or the MP Bear?
MP Bear. This is what what I use. Yeah. But I would like to store it in my configuration. This is what I wanted to check out the sources, and because I think it should be easier to extend.
Yeah, you should file a request for like an issue on our GitHub tracker and request that feature.
But the point is, it works completely different. Actually, it is the inverse strategy from Quarkus. In Quarkus, you would create with a plug in the project, and in Quarkus, you are downloading, the command line interface first, if you like, and then it will create your projects, and it will ask you, would you like to be in dev mode or not? And then it starts the watcher, downloads everything in the background, and then it will reload your projects. And I really like, the CLI experience, actually. So this Helidon init, it really worked well. And then I went to GitHub, and I took a look who creates that. And I saw Romain Gricourt. And I said, okay, I remember the guy because of Surly. And I take a look, you work for Surly. And I didn't knew about your GlassFIsh and Java E background, but I remembered Surly somehow, and you and Alexis. Okay, interesting. And I wanted to talk with you about the command line interface. That's the entire story. And I think you are behind the command line interface. So was it your idea to create that?
It wasn't specifically my idea, but I am a big fan of the idea of having a CLI experience. So you would say like the shape of the CLI that you see is probably like very much influenced by my personal opinions.
Okay.
The people that worked on it, I worked on the CLI with two other person, Santiago. I hope I'm not gonna say his family name because I might just say it wrong. And then another Oracle employee called Brian at Stat. So the idea for the CLI, basically, it came from kind of Dimitri, and it was just a simple request. Guys, we need a CLI.
Okay. Dimitri is a nice guy. I think it's completely unpolitical, I guess. So I don't know him, but
right.
yeah.
So then we kind of scrambled, and then what I used, so I wrote a bunch of JavaScript in the last few years. I did a Helidon landing page, the website. I also did the Helidon docs and a couple of other Vue.js-based projects. And I'm not sure if you're familiar with Webpack and the JavaScript bundling tool. So Webpack has this kind of dev server that can watch for your changes and incrementally kind of rebuild your app.
You should take a look at Snowpack if you're familiar with it, and Rollup. This is the next generation. So let's say the Webpack is more like, the first Sun server, and the Rollup is more or less almost like the GlassFIsh v3, and the Snowpack is already Helidon.
Okay, I see.
So this is like the progression, but it's very easy to use. If you do the next project, take a look at Rollup or Snowpack because they are almost nothing to configure.
Yeah. Because Webpack is a pain to configure.
This is what I wanted to say. It's very complicated. It's a technology from hell. You can do everything.
Yeah.
Even probably bake your pizza. But just if you would like to create something for the web, forget it. And I do a lot for web with the same idea as the backend. I just use plain JavaScript web components and Snowpack or Rollup, and this works perfectly.
Right. And so what I discovered when I was using these tools is they have like, when you create a Vue, I think it's Vue.js version 2 projects, they have a CLI. It's called the Vue CLI. And the Vue CLI it has basically the same experience. You can do Vue init, and it creates a project. And that project is almost fully functional. It contains like the package.json, the git config file, a README, and all these things, right? And then you can run npm run, I think it was in the past dev, or now it's called serve, S-E-R-V-E. And what it does is basically the same as Helidon dev. So to some degree, since I worked really a lot with this tool, and I like the fact that I didn't really have to have the fully featured, JavaScript environment that knew how to do anything and everything. Instead, I just had to have like a basic code completion, and I could just run this process on the background in my terminal. And then you would just, I open on my second monitor, or I split the monitor into, I open the browser, you make a code change, poof, your browser shows you exactly what you're working on. I think in terms of a developer experience, especially for a web framework, like a front-end framework, it's great. It's really great. It's powerful. And so when thinking about the CLI, I was like, man, we need to replicate exactly that same experience where you download the binary once you install it. And it is what I like about all the Go binaries is, this is jumping different topic, is the installation step. If you think about how do you install a Java CLI, well, you got to basically download some kind of zip file somehow and then put it somewhere and then put it in your path, right? So when you download like kubectl for Kubernetes, you just download the binary, you make it executable, you put it wherever you like, and you use it. It's like the installation experience, like there's none. So I really like that. And basically GraalVM, what it offers as a possibility now is, well, we have the goodness of Go and the greatness of Java as a programming language that we're really familiar with. And you could argue whether GraalVM in a production web app, is a good choice or not. But for making a CLI, it's great.
Yeah,
and there's no doubt about that.
Lots of command line, tools for my own use with GraalVM.
Yeah, I think this is where it's like undeniably like the best choice for Java people.
What I still would do, I don't know whether you did it. You could also offer Helidon.jar, where you can launch with Java -jar, would also work, right?
Yeah, so it's doable. We just never did a distribution that we could upload like that. We actually, so there is like a what's called the former Groovy package manager. There is a like
Okay.
there is a tool that you can use to install things these days on the command line, and I think it's originated from the Groovy environment.
SDK man?
Yes, and so if we wanted to publish, I think the CLI as an SDK man package, I would rather not publish the native image binary, but more like a plain Java distribution.
No, I would
if we were
just
to do this,
publish in addition this jar Helidon.jar CLI just to show that it's actually Java. Because for me, I just look at that as like this is Go, and that's somehow said that it is Go.
So you would just want to see the jar and not even have a wrapper script on top of that.
Yeah, just in addition to Go-like experience, I would just offer just the jar.
The Java-jar Helidon.jar, basically.
Yeah.
Okay.
Why not? I mean, because it will run on Windows and everywhere, and that would be the choice. Because I was a little bit suspicious, what is it inside? Because it could be whatever, right? But if it's Java, it is a little bit more secure, at least. I knew Helidon, so for me it was not a big problem, but it's always a little bit, okay, what I'm downloading from the internet, right? It's an executable thing. And Meg asked me, should I trust the thing? It's like, yeah, I'm trusting, and then it worked. But with Java minus jar, I think that there are people who would just prefer the jar. And I just, I enjoyed your experience. I'm still running the native because it is great. So I just put it to path and it works.
Yeah. Okay. So point taken. I think we should probably provide one more download.
And
it doesn't cost us anything. So
no, exactly.
We can just do
so
that.
Just to show, okay, we are pure Java, and with goodness of Graal, we can cross compile it to native thing. And what are you thinking about providing? Client side extensions so you can influence the template a little bit more. So
yes. So that's in the loop. We have a few features that we want to implement, and a pluggable extension API to kind of like add more commands, right? That's what you're asking for. Is something that we might come up with in order to support other use cases that we're not supporting. So if we were to support like maybe a little bit more of Kubernetes or Docker with the CLI, then we might do this with extensions.
Or I would like to influence the code you are shipping with, because you are actually executing an archetype. And the question would be, can I just then I would just have to provide my own archetype, right? Because you are actually not creating the source tree, you are just calling the archetype, right?
Right. And so we are not using Maven archetype. We kind of recreated a framework that's similar to Maven archetype, but that works with Maven archetypes. So our archetypes can be executed from Maven, so we have some kind of compatibility, but the templating framework is like homemade. The reason for that was that we needed that to be we have certain features that we want to support that we wouldn't be able to support with the plain Maven archetype framework.
Yeah, you hit the wall pretty quickly. So I also experimented with the archetypes. Really hard, to deal with packages, and with Maven archetype, it's really hard to do that.
Right. Yeah. So what happens is we have basically empty metadata inside an archetype jar that we do, so that Maven sees that as an archetype, and it contains Maven archetype as a hook, which is a Groovy script that you can provide to execute code, and we provide a Groovy script inside that's basically just gonna trigger our own archetype engine. And right. So what happens is when you run the Maven archetype with Maven, it generates an empty project. And then it runs our Groovy script that generates the project using our own framework.
Okay.
So this way, you can still generate a project from your IDE if your IDE knows how to create a project from an archetype.
Okay.
And then the Maven command line still works, but on the other hand, we also can support the CLI as a first-class citizen. I mean, it's really fast to generate projects with our stuff, right? So that's
no, but it's actually a great idea, because I hit the limits with our Maven archetypes as well. So there are a few bugs even, and with your approach, it's actually great, because it feels and looks like Maven archetype, but it's built on your own stuff. So what I remember, if you create a Maven archetype, at the end of the day, there's like a post invocation script that is kind of groovy.
Yes.
And
Yes.
then if you leave everything empty, then the groovy gets invoked. I just used this groovy script for logging, so I could now perform add additional information. This is what I used the groovy script for. But of course, you can call your own hook. So what you could do with your CLI, you could allow me, to create a new menu points. So there's one SE bear or whatever, and then it will call the Maven archetype, which will call your own templating language, and I could actually use your templating language to create some more classes or take your influence how the project looks like, right? This would be possible.
Right. So, I mean, we have a big gap in the documentation, but what you could do today is you could provide your own catalog. So we have this notion of an archetype catalog and archetypes. So you could provide your own archetype catalog locally and have your archetypes there. And then they would basically contain your choices. So you could make basically a set of archetypes that fits your use cases and always have them show up.
But I think your templating engine is nicer than the templating engine from Maven archetype, right?
Yeah, except that we didn't want to reinvent the wheel too much because we were uncertain where we were going. So think about it as we re-implemented archetype to solve the problems we were having.
Okay.
So we didn't go too far from the current framework.
So the correct approach would be to create my own archetype and just use your Helidon CLI to point to my own archetype to generate custom code, right?
Yes, what you could do is you could actually you create your own catalog, you put it locally, and you configure. You set in the Helidon config, you set the catalog and you make it point to your own catalog.
Okay, so what remains could be interesting features like post build hooks. So after the project was reloaded, as you said, I could just call Docker to create a Docker image, so you could specify more actions, right? So this would be the extension points of the CLI.
Right, some kind of lifecycle hooks, yeah. So in the future, we plan on supporting Docker, because right now what the experience you have with Helidon Dev is basically you run Helidon init and you answer yes or no for starting the development loop, or you could later on, like when you reopen your terminal on that project, you just type Helidon Dev. What that does is it monitors for changes, and it's basically rebuilding your app and restarting it whenever you have a change. What it does, support,
it restarts the entire Helidon project. There is no tricks with bytecode replacement.
Exactly. So some people were actually really, really strong on you guys need to do like hot class reloading, and we think no. This is simplicity is better. And you can have a lot of weird things when you do
exactly.
like
it never worked well,
like
and
this,
it is enough if every 10th reload you have some issues, then you don't trust the entire mechanism anymore. So I would say I would stick with simplicity as long as possible, and don't provide any hot replacement tips, because it's really too hard to do it right. This is why the hot deployment of application servers, in one point of time, I never trust that. So what I did, I had my own script which killed the server and restart the server, because one point of time, does it really work? And I would like to see it. So
yeah, I agree with that.
So funny fact, just because you said JavaScript. So I was in a JavaScript workshop with JavaScript engineers, to try to explain them web components and stuff. And they watch me, with my backend runtimes, and they ask me, what we have in JavaScript, we have a system, stuff which watches the changes and reloads the runtime. You have something like this? And I thought about that. It was like 2 years ago. So I don't think so. And then I thought about this actually pretty easy, because in Java SE7 you have even watches. So you have watch events which watch the changes. This is done. I only have to call Maven with Maven embedder and then copy the file over to my servers. And what I create a project called watch and deploy.sh. And this was 5 Java classes. And this is like, there's not a CLI. You're actually doing the java-jar what.jar, and it searches in documents folder for what.rc, and there are all the locations of the auto-deploy folders, and it just re-executes this Maven and copies the file. And this works actually surprisingly well. So this was very simple, no magic, and it worked really well. Now it's, of course, pointless, because Helidon and Quarkus, they don't have any deployment anymore. But so this was also a similar experience to yours. So I got asked by JavaScript developers. I thought about that, and it was very easy to build with Java, actually.
Yeah. So we optimized things a little bit, where we are running just the compilation and running your app as an exploded class path.
Mm-hmm.
So when you run Helidon dev, we don't really package the application.
Yeah, you have to be more careful because Helidon is larger, right? So and this words, my words were tiny, so it didn't matter. But you're right. In your case, yeah, it is of course faster. Yeah.
Right. So we don't have to basically copy all the libraries under target /libs, right? We create a class path straight up from the local Maven repository and the target classes directory. And then what we do is the first time you run it, we have what we call the prime build. Because we have to harvest like a little bit of information about your projects and so on. So the first time you run it, it's taking a little bit more time because we have to run a full build. But then every time you make a change, based on what the change is, we are only going to process the resources or recompile the classes.
Yeah, what you should do the first time, just add some status information because it takes longer than usual. And I thought you are downloading something from the internet the first time.
Yes, I agree that we need some more logging because especially if your repository is empty, your local repository, it's going to take a while, and especially based on your network internet connection, then you will not have any feedback from the terminal, and that might be a little, I think, frustrating.
Initial build downloading depths and
yes, I think we do have an issue to add that feature.
Okay, perfect.
So what I want to say is that regarding Docker and Kubernetes, it's I think Docker files are still a little bit cumbersome, especially for simple frameworks like Helidon, because all we care about essentially is you want to build a new layer that contains just your classes from your application.
Yeah.
And every time you rebuild, you want to rebuild that one layer, right?
One copy.
And yes, and the problem I have with that is when you do a Docker build, the whole environment is within Docker itself, right? Like the whole local repository is in Docker, all the layers, all the way are in Docker. And so then you have this discrepancy between your local folder in where your ID, runs off, and then your Docker image. And these two things are kind of different. And sometimes when you want to kind of tinker or like see what's happening, it's not that easy. So what I want to see is basically a tool like Jib.
Yeah.
Where you're doing offline kind of Docker daemon-less image builds, and add that on top of the Maven build in a Helidon project, and then have the CLI kind of play nice with this. So I'm mentioning Jib because it's the one exact project that basically implements that, and that's really popular. Though I think in the long term, we might end up re-implementing something like Jib because I think if you look closely enough, you're going to find, things that you cannot do with Jib. So what I want to see is basically a use case where you can incrementally support rebuilding the Docker image for your project as you are changing files, and also kind of incrementally redeploying your app inside a Kubernetes cluster so that you could basically work, let's say, with your Docker for desktop installation and Kubernetes straight up from the CLI. So you type Helidon dev and you have a Docker daemon running and your local cluster running, and then everything is working off of Kubernetes. Yeah. That's something we have as an experiment that I want to work on the long term, that I think would be a good value, because I think the problem with Kubernetes is you tend to work on your laptop and doing these things and you test, locally and stuff. And then it's time to port your app to Kubernetes and you have to write all these YAML files, and then it's complicated. And then sometimes you might even realize that you made the wrong decision before because now it's basically not working well with what you need to do in Kubernetes, right? Yeah. So if you were to generate a Helidon project and that from the start you had like all the boilerplate generated for Kubernetes, and then you typed Helidon dev without doing anything, and it just worked out of the box with your local cluster, I think that provides values to developers where they don't have to figure out this stuff. Yes. It just works.
Yes and no. So my problem with such approaches is that if something generates, the YAML, it always doesn't look right. Yeah, I'm always, able to delete something. And if you get that and you trust the tool, then it's okay. So, but I think you cannot just blindly trust a tool to generate the files and then run it, because in one point of time, you will have to understand the YAMLs if you go to production. You cannot just trust. For development, it's okay, but then you will have to understand the YAML in order to modify the YAML to go to production or integration. So I think the challenge here is to create a very clean YAML. So you could say it cannot be even any cleaner. It's just the minimalistic, beautiful YAML it's such a. I mean, you can nothing beautiful with YAML. So I mean, you could say JSON, right? So this was Mission Impossible what I said right now. But it's just minimalistic text file, right? Which ships to, and this is the challenge. Because always, if I use such a tools, I was always like, what happens actually behind the scenes? And I took a look at the files. I go, come on, there's a lots of annotations unused, and why they generated that, and looks like that doesn't look right. This would be the challenge, I would say.
Right. I think whenever you have a tool that generates boilerplates, you have that the same concerns, right?
Yeah.
If you look at JHipster, I think it has the same things where the beauty is that you can generate almost like a fully functional application with JHipster, and it contains things all the way down to like internationalization and stuff like that, right?
Mm-hmm.
And you can see how they did it. But then as you go and write your app, you might want to remove things or make it cleaner or have to customize every piece of it. And the problem is you might not understand everything that's there.
Yeah.
Right.
And I have a problem with it. I really hard if I am in project and something which I don't understand, or this is why I never use Scala, because if you click on a library and I see all the cryptic signs, so okay, this is I close it again and move away from it. And in Java is the beauty that you can actually understand a lot, right? So if you just click on string or string buffer, I mean, this is like beautifully written, so you understand this is like beginner's code in a good way, so you understand what's going on without any cryptic stuff. And I'm almost I think if you have to rely on code generators to be productive, something is wrong with the framework, I would even argue, because if you I don't know whether you have experience with Angular. This is another technology from hell. So I don't even know why they need all the stuff in the browser, dependency injection modules and all the stuff. And they need code generators from the command line to generate all the components. So it really reminds me. I don't know. Are you actually aware of the project called Xdoclet?
Xdoclet?
Yes.
Oh yeah, you mean the Javadoc plugin, right?
Yeah, exactly. So it was used to generate a lots of boilerplate because back then it was necessary, lots of XML to keep everything together. And the YAML could go also in this direction, like proprietary deployment descriptors.
You mean before the annotations were introduced in Java, people were doing annotation-based programming from Javadoc, right?
Yes.
That's what Xdoclet was used for.
Yeah. And the fashionable name was attribute-oriented programming. This was it was not like generating crappy code from Javadoc. It was attribute-oriented.
So that's what
programming.
AOP truly is.
Yeah,
attribute-oriented programming.
Aspect-oriented programming. Right?
Yeah, I know. I'm
this
joking.
is another technology which I always had. 3 use cases: logging, monitoring, and something else. And so, okay, this is already solved in application server. So give me something else, and then no one talks about AOP anymore, except if you implement your own runtime, right?
Yeah. So your point is very valid. In fact, I think we are gonna use your opinion later on because we're talking about implementing something like features in the CLI, and we have to be very careful with this because, in my opinion, the boilerplate is something you use only when you start a new project. We should not if we have to provide a tool that developers are supposed to use midway as they're working on a project just to generate something, I think there is a little bit of wrong in why we have to do this, right?
What you could do actually, just thinking about because I did it recently with a YAML templates for Kubernetes. You could actually say, look, what we actually can give you is the name of the service. What else? Maybe the name of the Docker file because you can derive it from the POM, or even less. What from my project is my package name, the name, and the Maven coordinates. I don't think is any other valuable information from you can derive from the Java source code, and maybe I can specify from command line, my Docker secrets or whatever I have, or Docker or Kubernetes URL, whatever, and then you can ask me to provide a YAML template and replace, my placeholders with the stuff So this would be and if you don't provide the template by me, you could provide your own template, a default template, which could be replaced by my own clean template, right? This could work.
Right. So you're asking for, if I were to rephrase what you said, for some kind of templating feature that could inject and derive values out of the project, like the simple ones, like my package name, my GAV, and I see.
This is a spontaneous idea. So you would provide me the values for my template, and we could agree of shell placeholder, something very simplistic. So you could say, what we know from your project, we can give you, as a me, I am the developer, you are the provider. You can say, you get from us, the artifact ID, group ID, something what the Maven archetype is doing. So then I can give
I mean, we have that implemented, just
yeah,
because we have our own archetype engine, and so we could basically expose something like we have today as a CLI command, so that you could use this to generate your own files. That's what you're asking for.
Yeah,
basically.
And then you can also ask, whatever it is in the microprofile config properties, we can also provide you the entire microprofile config key value pairs. Then I could configure my own stuff, and then I think this could work, right? Because then it is my clean template with your variables.
Yeah, it's an interesting idea.
Would be interesting.
Okay.
Yeah, just an idea. So it was spontaneous.
Okay. I'm gonna run that by our team and see what that does. That's a very interesting idea, because what this does, your idea is that it doesn't really bring any controversial idea that we have to kind of create something that is logically grouped as features, and that we generate for the user. Because we had these discussions recently, and I think this is a little bit controversial, because we have to kind of model some of the things that we have around our APIs as feature and expose them to the user, like, I don't know, Helidon, add, Dockerfile, for instance. And so what you're saying is, well, no, maybe we don't care about doing this logical model. Instead, we just provide a tool for users to just deal with their own boilerplate.
Yeah.
And the boilerplate is not opinionated because it's theirs. So
yeah. And you can provide your own empty templates for Docker, or your opinionated templates, which can immediately replace, because this is what could work.
Right. With an override mechanism, so you could say, okay, use my version of the Dockerfile template.
If there is there is no Dockerfile, you will create your own. If there is one, you will pick this.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, that's very interesting.
Mm-hmm. Perfect.
So anyhow, like the things that we want to do on the CLI is basically long term, find a way how to support in a good way Docker and Kubernetes for the local environment. And also, I think it's probably something we're going to do before that, support Gradle. I guess you're not probably a big Gradle user, but it's something that people requested quite a lot. And
you have to
do it
because you
Gradle.
get always the question, this is like a funky question to ask, do you support Gradle? But why not? You should, if you can support Gradle.
Yeah. And I think the problem is we are overall a Maven house. Like we use Maven, we are very proficient with it. We understand it very well. So for us, it's I mean, there was no other choices. And I guess we're very biased because we probably all have some kind of grudge against Gradle in one way or another. Having worked on WebLogic, I've seen probably the bad side of it, which I could say. But I can also recognize that on a small project, especially like a project where you use Helidon as a framework, Gradle can really thrive and really be good at doing what it's doing.
This
like the incremental Gradles.
Because if you think about this, so all my project are, regardless of the size, if you just rely on microprofile on Java E or whatever, what you end up being, if you are reasonable, in best case, one dependency. And this is basically it. So I never had to modify the Maven project. I actually don't care about Maven at all. And if I would use Gradle, it would be similar. So I don't have, there's not an XML dependency. It is one-liner. And I mean, Gradle is more interesting in more complex builds like Androids, where you can you have to program inside the Gradle file it's like a programming language. So Gradle is a mix between Ant and Maven. And I never had to use the scripting capabilities of my project. So I think Gradle is great, but in microprofile Jakarta environment where you have, set of APIs is less useful than in...
It has great incremental support that Maven will never have. And so that's why I think on smaller projects, Gradle can really be really good because it has something that Gradle doesn't have. And the explanation is very simple. Is on Maven does not know what a plugin does. Maven doesn't know if a plugin takes a certain set of files as input and produces these files as output, right? But if you've seen Gradle has every task and then task has input and outputs. So at core, Gradle knows what files a task is bound to, right? And then it's building a graph, and when it sees that files have changed, it knows exactly what things to rebuild, right? And Maven will never get that just by design, because it doesn't have these
But
capabilities.
remember in Java in Jakarta project was the war, which was tiny, so we always built everything. And
if you have to repackage, yes, doesn't really matter.
But if you have, I understand, in Helidon or Quarkus context, it could be different, because you could only just build which really different context. So this could make sense, I would say.
Right. It's all about incrementally rebuilding and then starting the app from the class path. And that's, I think, something that Gradle can do really well. So one of the big milestones we have for the CLI is to support Gradle.
Okay.
Oh, and by the way, you're talking about Windows. I did a lot of work in the last 2 months to support Windows. So we'll have native GraalVM Windows binaries available on the next version of the CLI.
Nice. And of course, a pure Java version as well.
Yes, with a special logo that says approved by Edambian.
Yeah, of course. Bien is like, the neutral accent always used,
Okay. Yeah, Edambian.
Fun.
Seen on erax.tv.
Yeah. Where people can find you? So on the internet. So you have, your Twitter handle and the Helidon pointer, to Helidon CLI. And
right. And I think that's pretty much it in terms of public accounts. They can find me on Slack in the Helidon Slack channel.
Yeah.
Let's see. They could also talk to me on the Eclipse Slack channel. I think I'm also on that one, even though nobody uses it.
Okay.
It's very interesting. There is literally nobody in these channels.
Very interesting. So you're the lonely Eclipse channel maintainer.
No. I'm just there, but I've never really said anything. It's just there's not much activity on these channels.
I thought, you will have to build your bot from IRC back then, to become the admin or reclaim the stuff or whatever.
No, but to some degree, I'm very pleased with Slack, because I see Slack as the new IRC. The fact that it's organized with channels and private conversations and stuff.
Yeah, it
looks like IRC,
yeah.
and I really like that.
Mm-hmm.
At some point, I tried to talk our management into using Freenode, and having because in GlassFIsh we used to have an IRC server, like a channel where people engineers would answer, but I think it was basically up to individuals whether or not they wanted to be on there. We didn't have any duty to be present on IRC and answer questions. But it's very pleasing to see that, because we're much closer to the community, and when people have questions, we can sometimes answer them 20 seconds after they ask the question. So I that's a great feeling. It's we may have lack of documentations in Helidon in some places, but if you have a question and you ask on Slack, we might be able to get you an answer very, very quickly.
Yeah, reactive Slack, right?
Yeah.
Okay, thank you. It was I really enjoyed, to talk with you about all the history, actually, common history. Have we actually met at one point of time at conference? You remember that?
Yes. We've met, I think, twice, and at the GlassFIsh party in the Thirsty Bear, probably once.
Okay.
And then I think last time I was doing a Helidon booth with my manager, Joe DePaul.
Okay.
And you probably passed by and said hi.
Okay.
You remember Ed Bratt, right?
Yes.
Okay. So Ed Bratt is my +2 manager. So it's the manager of my manager.
Now?
Yes, currently, yes.
Yeah, greetings to him.
So, yes. So whenever you've seen Ed on conferences, I was probably not very far, around.
Okay.
I think the first time, when was this? Probably at the GlassFIsh party for the Java 1, right after Java E7.
Okay. So it was always the Thirsty Bear party. It was run like GlassFIsh and joined.
Yeah, that's the community event where we get to meet, all the contributors and the people. Yeah.
Yeah. Okay, nice. So I just remember you from the early days and Twitter, but I don't remember you as from the parties. And but yeah.
I think once you tried to contribute a set of samples to GlassFIsh, and but that didn't fly very far, and so we had a very brief interaction.
Okay. So you didn't like my examples, I found out after 10 years,
No, I think it's just probably, I don't know what happened. There were probably other discussions between you and some other people at Oracle, and maybe you just didn't want to contribute your examples afterwards. I don't know what happened.
Okay, I have no idea.
I know that I was requested to kind of work with you on the samples, and then that never took off.
Okay.
That's what I
If
remember.
it was my fault, sorry for that. But crazy times. I always was
I don't think
overloaded
so.
for work. Now I try to contribute something to CLI at one point of time.
Right. So I need to remember the ideas that you expressed today. So I'm
So
probably
one idea is what I really would like to have. Either I will implement it by myself, if I would try, is that it remembers more stuff. So I would like to have that it remembers my MP choice and bear choice. This is what I would like to be remembered. Now I have to to there's no way to configure this right now.
Okay. So okay. We call that the user flow, the set of questions that you're asked. So basically,
the user flow has to be completely configurable. Then I'm happy.
Right. You want to be able to kind of dictate the user flow, the answers for the user flow. Okay.
Like npm. So Helidon init - yes go.
Okay. Okay, that's interesting. Yeah.
Yeah. And then if I know, because I would my artifact ID is in one place, the name doesn't matter in POM. So I could just change the artifact ID in the IDE. This is one place, and I can start hacking, for instance.
Okay. Okay. And you also want a plain Java distribution. Yeah,
plain Java just for marketing reasons, because I think we should promote more that Java is able to run is perfectly suitable for CLIs, and and why not? Because some people wouldn't trust the native image, and I can even imagine it is not possible to run it on a virus scanned environment on Windows. I can really imagine it in some environments. And I was and make you also have to say I trust this. So
because we are not signing the binaries yet. Something that we have to do. Yeah.
So and this would be just why not? You can just offer that. I mean, as on top of that, why not?
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Okay.
Perfect. It was nice to chat with you. I would like to re-invite you back in next year. And
okay.
So and it was fun.
Yeah. Likewise.
So thank you. And have a nice day in California.
Okay, thank you. Have a good night.